So we'd like to acknowledge respectfully that we are on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe people. We offer our gratitude to the First Peoples for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor these teachings. And I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Nina Papazian. She is a Trent alumni, and following her studies at Trent University, Nina completed a Bachelor of Social Work at Master University and a Master's of Social Work at Carleton University. Nina has worked as a registered social worker in the Peterborough area for 33 years. Their vast career in social work has included children's mental health, child protection, individual, couples, and family counseling, and nephrology social work, which is in the dialysis wing of Peterborough Regional Health Centre. Nina is currently working part-time as a counselor with the Women's Healthcare Centre at PRHC. And Nina's passion for the development of a practice in veterinary social work began following the death of her beloved German Shepherd in 2000. Nina began to explore the area of pet loss and bereavement and has been a presenter at the Association of Pet Loss and Bereavement Conference on several occasions, presenting on children and pet loss. Nina also has a post-MSW veterinary social work certificate from the University of Tennessee, and veterinary social work attends to the human needs at the intersection of social work and veterinary medicine. Welcome, Nina. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. So, welcome everybody. I am one person who's had personal and professional experience in the area of grief and bereavement, and I bring my personal and professional experience, as well as I draw on the wisdom and expertise of other folks who've done work in this area, including Dr. Kenneth Doka, Megan Devine at refugeingrief.com. She's a therapist and author of It's Okay That You're Not Okay. And in May of this year, she will publish a journal, How to Carry What Can't Be Fixed. I'm also drawing on the wisdom of the therapists and educators at Being Here Human, and they do grief literacy training as well as therapy. Also, the Association of Pet Loss and Bereavement. I've been a longtime member, and I draw on my experience as a member, as a presenter, and a recipient of their pet loss counseling certificate. So you might wonder, why are we having this discussion now at a time of multiple loss experiences? I think any time would be relevant to have this conversation. I think as our world is changing, our social worlds are changing, our relational worlds and what family looks like is changing. We need to pay closer and closer attention to the reality that in North America, and probably certainly beyond, that more and more families are including non-human animals. And our pets and companion animals, for so many people, they're now being considered as family members. And when we lose a companion animal or a pet, the impact can be intense, and it can take us aback and bring us to our knees. So I came to this journey after losing my German Shepherd in 2000, and then through exploring support resources, reached out to the Association of Pet Loss and Bereavement, which is a US-based organization with worldwide membership. And then I found my way along my path to the veterinary social work program at the University of Tennessee. And that's a new area of social work practice. And the focus is on 4 areas of practice. One, which is animal-related grief and bereavement. The second, the link between human and animal violence. The third, the area of animal-assisted interventions. And the fourth, compassion, fatigue, and conflict management. So my work is mostly in the area of animal-related grief and bereavement. So as a social worker, I pay close attention when I'm meeting a new client to asking about their life, their history, who's in their life, who's in their family, and I directly ask about pets or companion animals. And I believe that was it the US military approach around gay membership, don't ask, don't tell. I think for mental health professionals, human service professionals, if we don't ask about pets, people won't tell us about pets because it becomes an afterthought, and we often diminish, or if we're not directly asked, we're less likely to tell the story of pets in our family or our life, past and present. And in not telling those stories, we will, as helping professionals and social workers and counselors, we lose access to a portal of what can be incredible protective factors and resources for clients, as well as unique challenges and worries and stresses. So the 2018 Canadian Animal Health Initiative, that was 2018, so two coming up 3 years ago, suggested that 41% of households had at least one dog. It's very hard to find up-to-date statistics, but we know, and everyone's probably heard the term now, pandemic puppies, that as we entered into this out of the ordinary experience of pandemic and the social, the quarantine, the disconnection, the social isolation, the lockdowns, that people were in pain, being disconnected from each other, like neurological, emotional pain. And so there was a really spiked demand in people reaching out for pets, for adoptions, for purchasing, obtaining a pet through breeders and so on. So it really speaks to our yearning and our need for connection. So that's the 2018 stat. I think it would be safe to say that the percentage of people with any non-human animal or reptile or other creature in their home, in their family, has probably increased considerably, because there are more people living alone than ever, and there are more couples living together without children, and non-human animals are filling those spaces. We need to pay attention to how we position ourselves relationally to our pets. Are we mommy? Are we daddy? Are we grandma or grandpa? Are we auntie or uncle? Are we brother or sister? Because psychologically and emotionally, it shapes the relationship and the attachment, and it also shapes the impact upon loss. And I think it's really important for us, I just want to speak to today the really critical points that I've uptaked over my journey. This conversation could go on for hours, but I just want to touch on some really critical considerations. And one is that this is about attachment, and whether the pet we lose is a mouse or a llama or a horse or a bunny or a bird. It's about the nature of the bond and the attachment. And the grief associated with the loss of a companion animal has been what's known as a disenfranchised grief. So Kenneth Doka, Dr. Kenneth Doka, who's an expert in grief and bereavement, coined that term, I think in 2002. And what that means is the relationship with the deceased is not recognized or validated. The death or loss is not recognized or validated. And the griever's need to mourn is not recognized or validated. Now, and, you know, we've all heard that expression, well, she was just a mouse, a cat, a bunny, a bird. There is no just a. It's about the attachment, the bond, and the relationship, and the meaning of that relationship. And again, the positional, relational meaning of that relationship. And I did a talk once for veterinarians, and I said, for many folks, you know, I've heard this. They, you know, their experience is such, and they put into words, it felt like losing a child. And I didn't know at the time that there were some professionals in that group who had lost a child. And I found out afterwards, and I was really a little bit humiliated. But then I thought, they're going to hear that. And, you know, they're going to hear that in their practice. Because it's, for a lot of people, that's how they experience this loss. Because of the way we nurture our pets, we caregive them, we protect them, we comfort them. You know, it feels like, it can feel like, whether we want to call it parenting or caregiving, it just activates those relational and psychological and emotional dynamics. And Meg Daly Olmert has written a book called Made for Each Other, The Biology of the Human-Animal Bond. And she talks about the bonding hormone oxytocin, and how that when we are in close proximity to a pet or a companion animal, and we're touching them, talking with them, stroking them, scratching them, lying with them, that the bonding hormone oxytocin is released in their bodies as well as our bodies. So that, you know, that's what activates and maintains the bonding process. And when we face a loss, when we become aware, we have the conscious thought that our beloved pet is coming to the end of their life, or eventually we're going to lose them, that can activate what is known as anticipatory grieving. And it's a grief process that starts with the conscious awareness and mind, you know, acceptance that loss is inevitable. And I think it's our psyche's way of preparing ourselves, gently preparing ourselves. It doesn't prevent a further profound grief response at the time of actual death, but it moves us toward that experience and prepares us for the journey forward. Now, there are many ways that we can lose our pets, you know, theft, disappearance, a pet running away, custody access disputes, having to surrender a pet because of housing concerns, seniors that have to transition into care, accidental deaths, many, many pathways to loss. And some of those experiences are sudden and they're unexpected and traumatic. So along with the grief response comes a trauma response. So grief is an involuntary whole body brain response to the rupture of a bond or a separation or loss. As the two extraordinary women at Being Here Human say, it's inevitable, it's involuntary. Grief is not an illness, it's a process. Again, it's a whole body experience. And I have had many people share the story or share their experience of how a pet loss took them to their knees. They had other human losses, but nothing had impacted them in the way that the death of their pet. Because one of the uniquenesses of our relationships with our pets is the constancy. They're not up and down and in and out like even our best human relationships. They're pure, they're constant, they're safe, emotionally safe, there's predictability, constancy. There's a deep, deep connection that's nonverbal. Even though we might talk to our pets all day, there's a nonverbal connection that I think deepens that. There's the unconditionality, and again, just the constancy of that bond. And that's very challenging to experience, even again in our best human relationships. And I remember I was carrying one of my little terriers years ago, and a man came up to me and he said that he'd lost 2 close family members, but when he lost his little terrier, he said, I've never experienced anything like that before. So now, unfortunately, there are only very few, very progressive workplaces that provide pet loss bereavement leave. We know that acute grief responses can last for weeks or months. I want to try and avoid laying time frames onto a grief process, but it's a process that has its own unique way of unfolding. And when we are in acute grief, it affects us cognitively, our ability to concentrate, to focus, to process information, to remember. It affects us emotionally in terms of we're going to oscillate in and out of emotional dysregulation. It affects us socially. You know, if people are discounting or minimizing or invalidating our loss, and it affects us physiologically. Like what I call all our rhythms are disrupted. Our sleep, our appetite, our mood. So, you know, given that there's no structured or formal recognition of the impact on people when they've lost a pet, you know, we're often faced with having to continue to work, like come into our workplace when our capacity to be present and productive is quite diminished. So that leaves us quite isolated, and it can leave us feeling even, you know, again, more alone or more ashamed or worried about our state of mind. So there are 2 sort of general styles of grieving. There's what is called an intuitive or emotional style of grieving. So that's when we respond to loss with intense emotional reactions. And adapting or processing grief is involves processing those emotions. So that's when, for folks that are intuitive grievers, their needs are what we call eyeball to eyeball in terms of that nature of support. For instrumental grievers, the emotional reactions are more muted. They respond to and adapt to loss by thinking and doing. And they do best with shoulder to shoulder support or back to back support. And, we have to date gendered those grieving styles, but every single one of us has a unique style of grieving. And we can move in and out of either of these. And this is just important to have some basic understanding, because we might look at someone who's shared the very same loss and think, what's wrong with you? Don't you feel? And it may create some conflicts and some, if we're not understanding that we all grieve uniquely. The pathway of grief is not to disconnection and not remembering. It's a process. Just gonna find my little note here because this is really important. It's a neurological, sorry, it'll come back to me. But grief is a neurobiological process that is necessary for us to move away from one bond and attachment and to free up sort of internal space and energy and capacity to form a new attachment, because attachment is imperative to our survival. And I mean, a really good example of how imperative attachment is and how we yearn for it is the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks, in which he was marooned on the proverbial desert island alone. And I think he was in a FedEx plane that went down. And he developed a very strong bond and attachment with a soccer ball from, I think, the Wilson Company. So he named the ball, became Wilson. And that became his primary attachment. And that was a protective factor for him during his experience of isolation. So the other thing that's important to be mindful of is that our pets have much too short lifespans. I think people's experience of this as a disenfranchised grief is going to change. It's changing, because as more and more and more and more of us envelop pets and non-human animals into our family, we're going to inevitably experience a loss because of their shorter lifespans. So we're going to have that lived experience of grief and bereavement and that deepened understanding. So there are people now who have funerals for their animals, celebration of life ceremonies. There's sympathy cards we can purchase now. There's lots and lots of resources now on the internet for support and, that affirm and acknowledge. There is really a growing body of empirical research and knowledge of the vital role that pets can play in our lives. Again, in terms of our quality of life, our social well-being, our emotional well-being, our psychological well-being, our spiritual well-being, our mental health. And always, but particularly during this pandemic, it would be interesting to do research, in terms of the protective factors for those folks living alone during the pandemic, but really not living alone, like having companion animals in their presence, and what a difference that might make in terms of mental health and well-being. And for a lot of the folks that I work with who've had trauma, their pets become their reason to live. And it's really important to be mindful of that. Pets provide us with routine, attachment, a sense of meaning and purposefulness. They help with emotional and physiological regulation. And so those of us in helping professions have to be really mindful, and again, be curious about the nature and the meaning of the relationship for the person we work with, and between them and their companion animal. Because we need to understand that if they're facing an inevitable pet loss, we need to help them towards that transition and beyond. So I think again, there's innovative and new ways of thinking about grief. And one of them is that, there's a goodbye process in terms of saying goodbye to the physical being. But there is and can be a continuing bond with our beloved. And that bond takes the shape of memories, their legacy, how they impacted and shaped and changed our lives, what we've learned from them, including about our own lovability. And, they're, I think it's important, like when we lose a human, there are these traditional, at least in our North American society, traditional rituals of mourning, funerals, viewing, celebrations of life. So again, there are more and more people that are creating those opportunities for their pets, because often around a pet is a lot of people. They become, not only did they become members of our family, but they become part of our extended family. The other day I saw a bumper sticker. It said, "I love my granddog." So around each pet, there can be a circle. It's like these new types of kinship groups. So, often there are many people mourning the loss of a pet in a family. So, and recognizing and expressing gratitude for their life, rituals of reconciliation, especially when there's been a sudden loss, opportunities for us to give words to our gratitude to that being, what we thank them for, what we wish to ask forgiveness for or give forgiveness to. So there was something else that was really, I really wanted to speak to. The other thing is that for a lot of young folks at college or university, when they travel to college or university, they're leaving behind their childhood pet. And often the death of that pet happens when the young person is away from home. And sometimes it happens suddenly. Sometimes it happens without their knowledge or consent or inclusion. And sometimes, often folks learn about it after the fact. So this can be really impactful. And I think if you're in a college or university environment, it's important to be mindful of that. And for a lot of folks, the loss of a pet is the very first significant loss they experience, often in childhood. And when there is the loss of a pet in childhood, it's a teachable moment for parents. The opportunity to teach about death and dying and loss and the life cycle, and grieving and healing. But those teachable moments are often missed. And if it has been our first experience, how we're supported and assisted with that, or if we are not, can really shape our relationship to grief as we grow. And when, as a human service professional, as a social worker, we often ask people about their their loss history. And I always ask about pets because it often is the first loss. And even if it isn't, it's potentially a very significant loss. And again, it's important to know the circumstances of the loss, especially if there's, if the loss was associated with a traumatic event. So I just want to wrap up. And recently there was a story in the People magazine online. Miley Cyrus recently lost one of her beloved animals, one of her pit bulls, named Mary Jane. And Miley Cyrus's words really really spoke to me. So for Miley, Mary Jane was her best friend in the whole world. She said, our connection was purely divine, with a capital D. An incomparable love. We've never said hurtful things we didn't mean to each other. Never have we fought and went to bed angry. Not once has our loyalty wavered. She came to my rescue every time my heart was broken. She put me back together again. She had magic power. So I think that beautifully speaks to the nature of these relationships and connections. And there's another well-known quote by Anatole France. Until one has loved an animal, a part of one's soul remains unawakened. So just to wrap up, it's really important that we pay close attention to animals in our lives, in the lives of people we care about, when we or someone we care about is facing a loss. And the Meg Devine has a website. It's refugeingrief.com. She's the woman that's written the book, It's Okay Not to Be Okay. And she's got some really good resources on how to support someone who's grieving and how to help yourself at time of what she calls impact, at the time of a loss. So I'm grateful to have this opportunity today to share some of my experience and my thoughts and my learnings along my pathway and my personal and professional journey.
It's been so wonderful to have you with us, Nina. Thank you so much. And I loved so much of it that I was like taking notes and looking at it. And I really loved that part where you said about grief being a natural process that allows you the space to kind of, reorganize yourself around that attachment and let go and open yourself to being attached again. That's a beautiful.
Yeah, I'm just trying for the life of me. Yeah, well, I'll see if I can find that. But if I captured that at the essence, anyways, I'm glad. And it's not optional. Grief isn't optional, and it just is. And again, it's as I say, a neurological, biochemical imperative, and it's survival oriented. And it hurts. It's a painful process, But it's, you know, when we have a headache, we take a Tylenol. If we have a stomach ache, we may take some stomach. But the pain of grief is a pain that we must experience. I don't mean we need to sit in it 24 hours a day, but the more we push off from it, you know, though that emotional experience, that energetic experience gets stuck in our body, in our nervous system, and we get stuck in grief. And, you know, I suspect that a lot of mental health challenges are rooted in unprocessed grief. Um, so it is painful, but that's part of, it's like when we physically have a wound, part of the healing process creates pain. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm sorry I was late. Hi, Nina.
Hi.
I'm Melanie. I'm sorry I was late. And you may have covered this, so forgive me if you didn't. But I was thinking as I caught the last piece there about the number of people I know who seemed to the death of a pet hit them in a way that none of the human deaths did. It's just so they were so emotionally affected by their pets. And I think I was thinking about your quote there at the end from Miley Cyrus, and that unconditional love that a pet provides for people with sometimes complicated human relationships that come with sometimes some conditions. The pet love is a whole different thing. And maybe the response they have, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, but sometimes I wonder if the response we have when a pet passes away is so deep because we aren't expecting it, because we think, oh, well, that's not my grandmother, but actually it hits people. Do you think that response it comes at us because we're not expecting it?
You're right on. And we touched on exactly that earlier on. Yeah. That how often people are taken aback by the intensity of their grief. But I think that's where we have to let go of, I didn't feel this with my grandmother, or it wasn't like this with my uncle, the proverbial uncle, right? The uncle at Thanksgiving. It's about the nature of the attachment and the meaning of the relationship. And like you said, what I spoke to was the constancy of the bond.
Yep.
It's just this pure, we open our soul and our heart wholly with our animals. But as I said, even in our best human relationships, you know, our heart opens. It's a little bit like a scallop shell. It opens and then it closes. Then it opens and then it closes. But with our companion animals, our soul and our heart remains open. And I think that's one of the ways to understand the intensity of the impact. And not to judge ourselves, because it's about the attachment, and these tend to be very secure attachments, and rarely disrupted. We can have a blowout with our partner and feel detached, right? But we're never, or I don't think we're experiencing that same liability. Yeah. And insecurity and attachment with our companion animals.
Can we play this? Yeah, that makes sense. Can we just play this little piece though for faculty? Because I think one of the things I kept thinking about was, as an instructor, sometimes students need accommodation when there's been a death in the family, but and some people are less understanding when it's the death of a pet. But I really think that a student, and you said it, it's the age you are when you were a student. If your family got a pet when you were 4, this is where we are, right? And that's a lot to deal with. And I wish instructors could recognize that grief comes in all ways, in different ways. And it can be any kind of animal, I would also say, right? I'm sure you said this, but a companion animal is not only a pet that's a dog or a cat.
No, and I don't want to minimize, like said, it could be a mouse. I know I'm sounding like a parrot. Stephanie has a parrot, but it's about the attachment and the bond. I have 6 goats and I'm very attached to them. So, and I live in the country. So in where we live, there's a lot of folks, and where you folks are, we're surrounded by rural areas. So there's a lot of folks that have great big companions. They may not live in, in their living space with them, but those can be very enduring. Like horses can be quite long-lived, goats, and these are, and these creatures, well, horses, lambs, they're larger than life, but they're larger than life, and you can have a tiny little mouse or a gerbil. So for us not to, it's about the bond and the attachment, and grief is grief is grief. So that's what I said earlier, that there are some progressive, probably primarily American companies that have a pet loss bereavement leaves. I would love to promote that. Even if we were able to carve out one day, in the settings we work, it's symbolic. But the reality is that when we're in acute grief, that can last for weeks and months. So what you have with pet loss is that you don't have so much absenteeism, you have what they call presenteeism. So you have folks coming to work because they don't have the capacity or permission to take time, folks who are physically present. And I work in a hospital setting, so that's even more problematic because people's ability to focus and concentrate and remember, cognitively, we're not, everything's dysregulated, right? So, and let's say we have 4 pets. It doesn't mean our grief response is going to be exactly the same for each pet, each loss, because the meaning of those relationships, like 2 of my goats are great big boys, and I'm always saying, you're my firstborn. So it's just for us never to make assumptions, like especially as a helping professional, to just never make assumptions. And I love all my goats, but there's a couple of the boys I have soft spots for. Right? So it's exploring the relationship.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, if you can do some advocacy or if I can help in any way, but again, like the typical demographic that you host at the university and college, just listening, watching, if sometimes people really quietly make a comment about missing a pet or worrying about a pet, but it's just about kind of ears open, heart open, and just being curious, like, tell me about Susie, or you're worried about Susie, or you're missing Susie, or what have you, right? Because if people are even quietly putting something out there, it's in the work I do, the women I work with have all had pretty profound trauma, and one of my clients captured this beautifully. She said, I put a little bit out and I see what happens. And then I put a little bit more out and I see what happens. Right. And I think it may unfold a little bit like this with a worry about a pet, or the grief associated with a pet loss. Because even though more and more of us are going to have the experience of this, there are still folks whose reaction or response is going to shut someone down and feel judgmental or critical. Is that helpful?
That's great. Thank you, Nina.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
We have a question here. from someone from Izzy, and she'd rather not be on screen, which is great.
Yeah.
And so she asks, I had to euthanize my dog of 15 years just over a year ago. I still cry every day. I feel like I've lost a part of myself, almost like I'm suffering from a sort of phantom limb syndrome. How can I start to process this intense grief and heal?
Well, you're doing it right now, Izzy, by sharing with us, by being present here today. You know, this is a topic that it's not like we're learning how to make margaritas or gingerbread houses. So for everyone here today, I bow to you, because especially at this time, you know, our tendency is going to be to move away from pain, not towards. And I think that, you know, one of the reasons the grief process can get stuck or prolonged, even though we want to be careful about timeframes, is because we don't have the typical social and emotional support that we typically do with a human loss. And we may not have, you know, I've learned a lot. The Being Here Human, you can check that website. Those two incredible women do grief literacy training, and they've got a really innovative, progressive lens on grief and the need to pay attention to cultural and you know, racial bias in traditional grief understanding and therapy and so on. But I'll give Stephanie just some resources, some resource suggestions, and I can do some more reflection about that really important question, Izzy, and I can be available just to check in with, like I can do some more thinking and reflection as well as giving some resource ideas to Stephanie. Does that sound like reasonable?
That sounds great. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll get this to Izzy for sure.
Yeah, but I think,
Thank you.
yeah, I'll do, I mean, just in the interest of time, that's a really important question, Izzy. And I just want you to know that you're not alone. And the Association of Pet Loss and Bereavement, they have chat support. It's not, you know, when we used to think about chat rooms, we think, but they have very skilled folks facilitating their chat support, the chat grief support, everyone who has had a loss. And they have chat support throughout the week, so you can check out their website. And I would never hesitate to refer anyone to access their resources and support. And so that's something that's available on your own time as well. A hospice doesn't include pet loss grief support at this point. Not even those folks who do grief and bereavement counseling, not all those folks, I mean, in general, really understand the nuances of these particular losses, unless, of course, they've gone through it themselves. And I just remembered one thing. I had an experience once where someone just really quietly said to me, "There's something I need to tell you." And I thought, I wondered what I was going to hear. But they said, "I love my dog more than I love my wife." But it was very quietly said and very carefully. So that just came back to my mind. So we need, Izzy, you just reminded me, Rabbi Earl Grolman, who's written a lot on grief, he says, the only cure, and I put cure in what do you call those, Steph? Chris Farley, the weather report, and the only cure for grief is to grieve. And okay, let me find, I had another thought that really dovetailed beautifully into Izzy's question, but we need to be loved in grief, and we need not to be alone and isolated. So that's the first step. And again, Izzy, by being present here today and by expressing your question, that's very brave of you, and that's an important part of moving forward.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nina. And Izzy has sent me that she's really grateful, and thank you so much. I think she meant to send it widely, but I'll pass it along.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming to speak with us today. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Nina.
Thank you.
Thank you.